Devolution.
Our ability to handle amendments and motions demonstrates why I should have local decision-making here in Yorkshire, but perhaps that would put my motion off to a bit of a sticky wicket. The reason I'm proposing this tonight is because the United Kingdom is one of the most centralised in terms of how power is wielded out of any developed country. We see that time and time again where local authorities, local councils have their general revenue cut, but then they get additional money if they do what civil service wants. Examples of that might be the new homes bonus, or the kind of additional, additional kind of taxations that we can put if only if we're allowed to spend them on social care, social care precept. All of those are examples of central government kind of almost micromanaging local government and saying how it's done. I'm aware at the moment there is therefore a push for Yorkshire-wide devolution. There is the One Yorkshire deal which is out there as a proposal, and that is, I think, the best attempt within the existing legislation to get Yorkshire-wide agreement. It's trying to use the city, region and combined authority legislation that exists to try and get Yorkshire-wide devolution. The problem with that is that you can't have one person as mayor of over 5 million people. It is simply too large and too diverse a geographic region, Yorkshire, for it to be represented by one person. So that's why we want to go further, and we want to go for a bigger devolution for Yorkshire. We want a full Yorkshire Parliament in control of spending and taxation for our region. And then for it to be more democratic and accountable, we think that it should be elected on a proportional basis in order that all the different views and diversity that make up Yorkshire as a region are able to have a voice at that table. So that's what we're calling for tonight. We're calling for the establishment of a Yorkshire Parliament so that we have devolved power and spending over our own affairs in Yorkshire. Yorkshire is one of the great historic counties of this country. We know in Scotland they've got a parliament in Scotland, but they've got roughly the same GDP and population size as Yorkshire. Yorkshire too could have its own parliament and have its own say over its own affairs. We know in Wales that Wales has pushed for its own assembly, and they have devolved power and a say over their affairs. Both those regions actually do a lot better than Yorkshire in terms of public spending per head because they've pushed for those powers and they've won those from the UK government down in Westminster. So I think we should be pushing towards a more devolved UK, more of a federal United Kingdom in which regions have a real say and control over their own powers. This works very well in other developed countries such as Germany where they have a federal system, or United States where they also have their own federal system there. So what we're pushing for tonight is a Yorkshire Parliament so that the people of Yorkshire can have a say over the affairs of the things that affect Yorkshire.
Thank you. Seconder, Councillor Bellinger, I believe.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll second that.
Good.
And I'll tell thee all this for now. I support a devolution for Yorkshire. However, I don't support the mayoral system, as I believe a more stronger and robust parliamentary system should be in place. The issue with Metro mayors is that they're still constrained by Whitehall and how tax revenue is spent. The other disadvantage of having elected mayors is the potential election of an unsuitable candidate who will be difficult to remove from power once in. Or a mayor with their own agenda of issues are not prepared to look at the wider issues. A democratic parliamentary system resolves this. By having a Yorkshire Parliament will allow for constraints to be lifted, giving us the power to decide where best to spend, how much to spend, ensuring our services are given funding to improve in areas which are failing, CAMS being one of them. It brings politics closer to the Yorkshire people and gives them greater involvement in decision making. It gives maximum transparency and accountability in respect of the decision making process, decisions made and who makes them. It offers representation which most closely reflects the political makeup of the Yorkshire electorate. It also has the ability to represent the interests of Yorkshire in every respect, but it also is best placed to secure the future of powers to Yorkshire as a position of Devo Max. Just think of the difference we could make to our schools, hospitals, police and other emergency services if we controlled our own finances rather than government. I hear you thinking, we have combined authorities. Even their funding streams are insufficient to compensate for the massive cuts to local authorities. We need to work for what's best for us, what's best for you, the authority, Calderdale, and the people that we represent. So I will rather back this system than a mayoral system. Thank you.
Thank you. We have an amendment, 13B Amendment 1. Councillor Swift.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. I agree with quite a lot of the arguments that Councillor Baker and Councillor Bellinger made in broad terms about the case for Yorkshire devolution and the over-centralised nature of the British states. It would be hard to disagree with them. I think that what our amendment tries to do is, first of all, recognise there are two strands to this debate. One strand is, what in an ideal world would we like to see in terms of a more decentralised structure for the UK? And clearly, a democratically accountable structure at Yorkshire level would be an important part of that. So I agree with that part of Councillor Baker's resolution. I think a little bit pushing, you're pushing your luck when you start to specify directly elected by single transferable vote. You must appreciate that's likely to be a matter of some contention about the election method. But I think also, as council and as leader of the council, what we have to do at the same time is to respond to say what's the right thing to try and do for Calderdale here and now in the context of a government that is not going to put in place a Yorkshire Parliament and that is saying the only way forward on devolution is some sort of mayoral model. So while I agree with some of the concerns about a mayoral model of leadership for Yorkshire, although I point out in terms of population that Greater London is twice the population, but then it does have the accountability provided by a directly elected assembly, so it is different again. And I think in any one Yorkshire deal, we need to be very cautious about the checks and balances on the mayoral powers, but that's perhaps a matter of detail. And certainly personally, I would see whatever devolution deal is eventually negotiated right now as a step towards something better. So I think what the amendment is trying to say is, yes, let's try and establish how far there is common ground across the council about the way forward in terms of devolution in the long term, the model of devolution that we would like to see going forward. And I think it would be quite helpful actually to have that debate and to see views coming forward from each different group and identify where there is common ground and where there is differences. If I wanted to be picky, there are one or two things in the Lib Dem motion, apart from the question of the electoral systems, which I'm probably more sympathetic to you on that than many others in this chamber would be. I'm not sure that I want to see. I mean, I'm no great fan of police and crime commissioners, but I'm not totally sure about the idea of moving immediately to a Yorkshire-wide police force, which is what effectively giving police powers to Yorkshire Parliament would seem to suggest. And I think the original motion is a bit light on the question of fiscal devolution, and I think a bit of a debate about how you would put in place the appropriate fiscal powers and fiscal deal for a Yorkshire Parliament should be part of that discussion as well. So this motion is mainly about setting up a process to say, can we have a bit more of a debate about where there is common ground. For those who aren't happy about the One Yorkshire proposal, again, what it says about there is quite carefully worded. It simply says that the One Yorkshire proposal is an achievable option within the current system. Personally, I think it probably is the best that's currently available, but again, I recognise that may not be a 100% shared view, and I think I've previously argued in answering questions on that actually the important thing for Calderdale is to keep our voice in the door in any discussions about the shape going forward, rather than rule options out in an early stage. So I hope to see this as a constructive amendment that tries to find a way forward that continues the debate.
Thank you, Councillor Swift. Is there a second? Hold on. Maybe not.
Yes, could I second this, please? I mean, this is a very complicated issue that's been dragging on, not just in discussions in Calderdale, but across all kinds of areas in the country. I've heard several different proposals. The one original idea was devolution on the basis of a Leeds City region footprint, and frankly that's the one I supported. Then we've had the One Yorkshire deal. Now we've got the proposal from the Liberal Democrat Party about what in effect would be a Yorkshire Parliament. The problem about that, for me, and the Liberal Democrat resolution, is that it's coming forward to us on the basis of a time-limited discussion for the first time tonight, hugely complicated in constitutional terms for the potential future of this borough. And we're being asked to make a decision of that enormity on the basis of just this debate, late at night, what is it, 25 to 11. What the amendment is trying to create is a process by which all of us can sit down together and think between the different options that appear to be around, try and find a process for all the different views to be to come forward, and that would, if necessary, involve the Yorkshire Parliament proposal. But it's important that we think in this, yes, about what's best for Yorkshire, but very specifically about what is also best for Calderdale within Yorkshire. And that's the debate that we've not fully had yet in this council chamber, and which we now have the opportunity to create. So the amendment is a genuine attempt, as Councillor Swift said, to create a process for a broad discussion amongst us all about bringing forward Calderdale's preferred approach to a longer-term devolution deal for Yorkshire. And it specifies the key issues, or three of them anyway. We must address the issues of greater democratic accountability, substantial and sustainable devolved fiscal powers, and what current regional and sub-regional powers and funding should be exercised at a Yorkshire or more local level. These are the issues I think that all of us want to try and address. And I would make one further point. We do need to get a solution to this problem, because the way the government operates its funding regime, if we're not careful and we keep, I was going to say prevaricating, but we continue unable to resolve this issue at a Yorkshire level or West Yorkshire level, then we'll find it more difficult to get the kind of growth deal that we originally got for the combined authority, and which all of us have seen the value of over the last couple of years as these huge investment packages have been brought forward. It's been made clear to us that unless we sort this issue out, that may very well not be happening to the same extent, and we need to make sure that it does.
Councillor Scullion.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I want to support this motion, and I want to thank the Liberal Democrat group for bringing it forward. I think this, as this amendment indicates, should really be the start of a discussion rather than the completion of it, really, that we do need a proper discussion. As others have said, I'm not a big fan of mayors in terms of that concentration of power, because I'm worried about some of the questions of checks and balances and accountability. But on the other hand, I'm a big fan of devolution and of local decision-making happening in the local places that are affected by decisions. But I also don't want to see Calderdale fall behind. I want to see Calderdale in the discussions about devolution wherever they take place. I think one of the reasons why I support this motion is actually the debate is really important. If you look at Greater Manchester as an example, in terms of some of the things that they are doing around transport, integrated transport, around health, really important issue for us, then we want part of that action, and we have to be in those debates. And we can't wait for government, we can't wait for South Yorkshire to sort itself out. We have to keep pressing government to try and make sure that Calderdale and Yorkshire have got a place at the table. But I think one of the reasons why the amendment talks about taking this to scrutiny and having a proper, more lengthy discussion is not just about structures and Parliament and voting systems, it's also about our ask. What are we asking for as Calderdale? How is our ask different from Hull? or Richmondshire? What is our ask? What's important to us that we want to put into that bid for more devolution in Yorkshire, which is why I support this particular amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Scott, it's Councillor Benton, then yourself. Councillor Benton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd echo the comments of Councillor Scully and Swift. Certainly thank Councillor Baker for bringing this debate forward this evening. I think from recollection of the 18 different local authorities across Yorkshire which have put forward the One Yorkshire potential deal, I understand we're the only local authority which is yet to have a full debate in this council chamber on devolution. So it's certainly years overdue, and welcome the opportunity to discuss the points in this chamber this evening. Having said that, I probably won't come as much as a surprise, but I can't support the Liberal motion going forward this evening. A few red line issues, certainly as far as I am concerned. First one is the notion of a directly elected parliament. Let's be clear what we're talking about here. We're talking about more politicians, more costs, which I don't think is something the government, the public here in Yorkshire are ready to support just yet. And of course, there's no evidence whatsoever to suggest that a parliamentary devolution model will actually deliver the results and the benefits people want. The second issue is the idea of proportional representation. Of course, it's only a few years ago, since 2011, when the British public were offered a deal, offered a referendum on proportional representation, and that was soundly rejected by a margin of over 2-1. So if we were to ever be in a position where we had devolved government, I'd personally favour the first past the post system, so I can't support this motion for that reason either. Moving on, the motion here says powers equivalent to a Scottish Parliament. Well, let's be quite clear about the powers which the Scottish Parliament does have. Scotland has its own legal system, and the Scottish parliamentary model is very much based on that fact. Are we realistically talking about Yorkshire having its own legal system here, which departs from the rest of England, which is what this motion actually, if you take it to the letter of what it states, would bring about? I don't see that as a plausible possibility at all. Scotland also has the power to vary tax. Of course, at the moment it is the only part of the it is a part of the UK which levies the highest tax, and there's already an indication that it's having severe confidence on business investment and future business growth and the development of the economy going forward. So I can't support it for that reason either. There's also questions here about the federalist model. It's one thing offering devolution to Northern Ireland, Wales and Scotland. Of course, it's another thing entirely when we're talking about English regions having what is in effect a federalist parliamentary system. So for those reasons, I'm afraid, as I say, I welcome the discussion coming forward this evening, but I'm unable to accept the motion as it stands. Moving on to the amendment then, I think the amendment is quite clear what it seeks to bring about, and my group's happy to support the three key asks here. Particularly, if I can just wrap up very quickly, the notion of having a scrutiny discussion on working out what a cross-party cooperation can potentially look like going forward. Just one brief note of caution. Under Part 4, it does mention a One Yorkshire proposal. Now, we will be supporting this amendment this evening. However, the government have made it clear that a One Yorkshire proposal will not occur at the present moment in time. So again, I would repeat my group's ask, not only to the Leader of the Council, but other Conservative and Labour leaders across Yorkshire, which would be to be realistic in terms of what we are actually looking for here when we talk about a devolved model. But I look forward to the debate at scrutiny to put that point over.
Thank you, Councillor Benton. Councillor Mrs. Carter.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I really don't know whether I should be standing up and saying this. It isn't a discussion that I've had with everybody else, so I might get into bother, but nevertheless, I'll give it a whirl. You've talked about scrutiny. My request would be that scrutiny itself, if it's just a single scrutiny panel, is a bit difficult. Would it not be better and would it not be possible to have the council meet as a committee so that we could discuss it with all of us present, as opposed to some of us trying to get into a scrutiny panel? Because it is such an important issue for all of us, not just for us, but the people represent and the whole of Calderdale. And it seems to me that discussing it as a council committee would be an absolute right way forward, so we can all be present. Sorry, Mr. Mayor, and I'll wait till the inches over.
It's a valid opinion. Thank you. Councillor Mrs Carter. No one else is indicating, so I'm just trying to think, are we with Councillor Baker on the...
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Tonight, there's a real historic opportunity at stake here. If we were, as a council, to vote in favour of a Yorkshire Parliament, that is something that would gain headlines and publicity right across the country. It would be a real historic opportunity for us to really push that agenda and actually to aim a little bit higher, to dream a little bit further, and to imagine real proper devolution for Yorkshire. Vision it now, going off to York on the train, to have a proper democratic parliament where we'll decide on things. I know a lot of members of this chamber will agree with some of the sentiments there. They will have looked at history and seen the risks of what happens if you put too much power and concentrate too much power in one person's hand. They'll agree with me when I say that the UK government is too centralised in its power making, because they themselves as councillors will have felt the frustration that they can't actually make any real local decisions because their hands are tied by the funding rules that come down from our civil service down in Whitehall. This is about us being able to make decisions here in Yorkshire about the things that affect Yorkshire, and you all have the opportunity tonight to vote for this motion as unamended in order to put that. So really, I'd urge both the Labour and the Conservative groups tonight, don't work together, don't be the roadblock to this radical transformation that we need to see real local democracy here in Yorkshire.
Thank you. Would that include passports at Todmorden in our huge independence? Being flippant. Okay. Councillor Swift.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I'm not going to repeat the arguments that I made earlier on. Simply say Councillor Carter's suggestion about some sort of cross-part all-member discussion. Yeah, why not? I don't think that's inconsistent with the wording. It talks about in consultation with scrutiny powers and party groups. I think that gives us the flexibility to set up what we want, and I think that's a helpful suggestion, and we'll have a look at how that could be done.
So to vote on the amendment, please. All those in favour, please show. Any against? So the amendment is carried. It becomes a substantive motion.